My name is Anita Tripathi. I am she, her, hers identifying, and I am officially the assistant professor of design and technology at Davidson College, which is a small liberal arts college just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. And we have a small theater department there. I am the only designer on staff, or part of the faculty, which does not mean I design every single thing for every single show. But it does mean that I am in charge of the design curriculum, and then working with the production side to make sure that we're in sync and that we're creating something for our students, and also putting the shows up that we actually produce ourselves.
Where did you start, and how did you get to where you are today?
Definitely went a very non-traditional path, and this is never in my life, if you ask me if this is what I would be doing, would I have come up with this. I think I started doing, because that's what we call it, right? Doing theater when I was like in sixth grade. But I always did like behind the scenes stuff. I never had an interest in acting. I had to do it once. I did it once in high school, and then I had to take an acting class in college, and then it was like, okay, I'm done, good, yay. So that's never been my passion. But when I graduated from high school, I actually went to Washington University in St. Louis and majored in political science and German. I took one theater class while I was there. I hated it. It did not suit me for what I was doing. But on the sidelines, I did a lot of theater, other types of theater work that were going on campus. There was a particular festival that they have at WashU in the spring where they clear the parking lot and people get together and they build theater buildings from the ground up and write a script and do a play and have a big celebration for 3 days. And it's called 13 Carnival. I don't know if they still have it. I'm sure they didn't last year. But I was always very, very heavily involved in that. And so that was my hobby, right? I come from, my father's from India. So my choices were being a lawyer, a doctor, or maybe an engineer. That might have been okay. So this idea of being in the arts and that being a living, first of all, certainly never would have been like approved culturally. So there's a cultural component, right? And we face that a lot in higher ed, right? Where parents are not supportive of, like, okay, you can major in art as long as you major in something useful at the same time, right? But I personally just didn't know that theater was a profession. Like, I'm not sure how I didn't ever figure that out. It's not like I didn't go to plays and wasn't involved. I just didn't really think about it as a way of making a living or as a career, right? So I graduated with a Fulbright to go to Germany for political science stuff, international relations. And then I became really ill and was hospitalized and was not able to go on that trip. And so I'm sitting around an apartment now in Columbia, South Carolina, because that's where my parents had moved to. And I just started thinking, for the first time in my life, I was like, okay, what could I do that would just actually make me happy? And I was like, I really like theater. So I called up the University of South Carolina. It was during the summer, and I was like, hey, do you need anyone to do anything? Can I volunteer? And they at the time had a summer season and were like, oh yeah, free people, of course, come on over. And so I spent time actually stage managing. That's like kind of where I found my niche. And then that's when people were like, you should really consider, pursuing this. And I was like, well, I already have a bachelor's, I don't need to do that. And they're like, well, there's a master's. What? Scooby-Doo. So then I took 2 years to take some theater classes because I knew nothing formally, and to build a portfolio, and started took a scene design class, and the professor of that class said to me, you have a real talent for this, and I never would have thought that or considered that. And so I actually went to URTA's for both stage management and scene design. I got accepted for both. And then I decided that I like having an opinion too much to be a stage manager. And went the scene design route and actually went to the University of South Carolina for my MFA. And then after that, part of that grad program's requirement is to do an internship. So I went to New York for, it was a semester, but turned into a year. I worked at the Public, and then I met David Gallo. And I said, hey, I'm a lonely student. Would you mind taking a look at my work and just giving me feedback? And he's like, actually, I'm doing a little class at my studio for a few people. Why don't you join us? Okay, sure. Free class from David Gallo. Yeah, I'll do that. And then I ended up assisting him in his studio and doing model building for Broadway shows. And became a scenic charge for the Shakespeare Theatre of New Jersey. And then ultimately went to Virginia Stage Company as their prop manager. And that's when I became the resident scene designer, became part of the union, and after that, applied for teaching jobs and started teaching. So that's a very long answer to your very short question. But it's a very long journey, and actually a large chunk of time of my life as well. But as I talk to my students, I tell them things like, first of all, so many skills are transferable to theater, right? Because theater is life. It's life on stage. We're watching it unfold before us. It's ephemeral and it ends, but it's life. And so the more you know about life, the better you are going to be at theater, right? And then the other thing I like to tell them is, before I went to grad school, I had never painted anything in my entire life, and my assistantship was going to be painting. So I took a painting class at a community college the summer before I started grad school, and have ended up doing professionally for Lort Theaters. So I think the other thing is, you can do anything. You absolutely can, but you have to try, right? You can't be afraid to try. And maybe that trying is a little thing that doesn't matter so much. Like if you feel terribly at the community college painting class, okay, who's going to know? But it also gives me great inspiration, and hopefully inspires them as well, that skills are built. There are definitely people who are genius designers. I'm not one of them. I'm just one that works really hard at it.
From where you sit now, both with your life experience and what you know now being in higher ed, what would you recommend to a high school student who perhaps goes, I want to be a scenic designer, I know?
Being in higher ed or teaching at some level is a great way to ensure that you have an income and that you get to do what you love, right? Some people, teaching is not for them, and so that's not going to work out. But if it's something you think you might be interested in, I think it's a great way to not only have an income, but also be constantly refreshed, right? Because you're going to have new students and you're going to have new classes and you're going to get to do new projects that you may not be able to do elsewhere. So my grad school was partly funded by an assistantship where I worked in the shop. I think that's great because all those shows go on my resume, right? Like, so that I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Or you might be a teaching assistant or whatever. You're still gaining experience. And I was in state and I was at a state university. So I did have loans, but I was able to pay them off way before most people that I know. So that's a tricky question. And it's particularly tricky for underprivileged and underrepresented voices because they may not be in a privileged position to pay. I do think there's a push in the industry to start changing that. I would always recommend looking for a paid internship rather than a volunteer opportunity, unless, say, you are just hanging out at home for the summer. I think the other thing is whatever experiences you can get, they don't have to be theater experiences, right? Art history classes, painting, sculpture, whatever, like props, stage management is great, at learning about the process and then making connections with people as you go. So I guess my overall advice is, okay, would it be great to be paid as a scene design intern? Yes, but those don't really exist. So you're gonna have to find something that gets you into that experience. And it's generally gonna be painting or props, but stage management's great, or maybe you're working as an electrician. You will still be in the room with the people making it happen. And I think the key is taking advantage of that, right? And just talking to people and saying, hey, can I buy you a cup of coffee? And could I just learn about what you did and what advice do you maybe have for me? Et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, working in theater is great. I think being paid is kind of necessary now. But maybe you split your time and you do half of something and half of something else. But maybe you give tours at a museum. Still, again, feeding the soul of the artist.